Good evening, I'm Dan Maries. Welcome to Back Behind the Bamboo Curtain. The title implies that we've been here before, and that's partly true. About a year ago, I was lucky enough to travel with Tours of Peace, a Tucson-based nonprofit group that helps Vietnam veterans deal with lingering emotional wounds by taking them back in country on a mission of humanitarian assistance to the Vietnamese people. It was an unforgettable journey filled with heartbreak, hope, and healing. Last November, when Tours of Peace went back again, I couldn't turn down the chance to go along. This time, we would visit the heart of what was once enemy territory, a place once called North Vietnam.
I mean, I never dreamed of being in north of the DMZ.
That feeling was widely shared as we began our two-week journey. The DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, was a line diplomats drew in the mid-1950s to separate North Vietnam from South. The line is long gone, but anxiety was running high for most vets in our group while we toured Hanoi, capital city of the old communist North.
Dan, it's just very confusing to start. I just have to say confusing because I never knew I could go to North Vietnam and not be a prisoner of war.
A prisoner of war here. This is the infamous Hoa Lo prison, dubbed the Hanoi Hilton by captured American prisoners of war.
So that is why the American pilot named this is the Hilton. So the original name of this one is Hoa Lo. Hoa Lo means a very hot, difficult place.
In 1993, much of the prison was torn down to make way for a nearby high-rise hotel, but one corner has been preserved as a museum. Built by the French in the late 1800s, the jail housed hundreds of American pilots at various periods during the war, including Senator John McCain of Arizona. A picture of the former naval aviator still hangs on the wall. Cold cement cells can only hint at what POWs endured. Endless days and nights of solitary confinement, beatings and torture. Veterans have mixed feelings about visiting.
There's an awful lot of suffering here, Dan. It's just a very sad place.
The walls here at the Hanoi Hilton are at least 20 feet tall and made out of thick stone. If you look to the very top, there's also shredded glass. That kept prisoners from trying to escape. For Lance Dickinson, a helicopter pilot during the war, the fear of being shot down and captured was real and constant.
This is a piece that I had to confront. You know, one of my flight school class members was a POW in the Hanoi Hilton, Frank Anton, and that could have been me. All this time I've carried a lot of anger about that.
Not far from the Hanoi Hilton, we find the final resting place of the man who led the fight against American forces.
A lot of Vietnamese people, they consider Ho Chi Minh, he's not a communist man. We consider him like a nationalist. So he was the one who used the Communist Party like the way to get independent for the country.
Affectionately referred to as Uncle Ho, Ho Chi Minh's body lies entombed in this three-story granite mausoleum. When Ho Chi Minh came to power in 1945, he appealed to the U.S. for support of Vietnamese independence from French colonial rule.
He sent 8 letters to the U.S. government to ask for help from the government, like that, from the U.S. But he did not get any reply from that.
Some historians believe a clear show of U.S. support for Vietnam in those days after the Second World War might have prevented decades of bloody conflict to come. Now, some 30 years after the end of the Vietnam War, nearly 2 million American veterans bear wounds and scars that can't be seen. Once called shell shock, many vets suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, an anxiety disorder that can develop after exposure to a terrifying event such as combat. Flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbness, depression, and feelings of intense guilt are common symptoms. Jess DeVaney of Tucson founded Tours of Peace after returning to Vietnam on his own in the early 90s.
I don't know, I just feel like I have a responsibility, and I've just been lucky enough, fortunate enough to just be the first one to get there, and now everybody else can go through the door, and there's the key.
Like so many of his brothers in arms, Jess found himself feeling lost, unable to move forward after witnessing and surviving the horrors of war. Jess finally was able to find peace in the place he lost it. Now he shares his so-called healing process with other veterans seeking closure, but it's not always an easy step to take.
Well, it's a tough one. Dan. I mean, it took me 37 years to dig the hole I was in deep enough that I couldn't get out of it on my own.
Lance Dickinson, also from Tucson, finally had enough mental suffering.
My fear meter is overwhelming me right now, so we're in the right place.
In March 2004, he decided to go back to Vietnam with Tours of Peace for his first return trip since the war ended. I was fortunate enough to travel with Lance back then as he faced his fears head on.
Why? Why?
Painful memories overwhelmed Lance as he revisited the same rice paddy he was flying over in 1967 when he was shot and nearly killed. It may seem harsh, exposing veterans to such horrifying places, but it's part of a healing process, replacing old memories with new ones, turning Vietnam back into a country and not a war. Does it work? 8 months after his first visit, Lance walks out into the same rice field. What he once referred to as his valley of death, he now sees as a valley full of life.
It's very meaningful to express ourselves through these beautiful roses here today. Well, I'd say that the greatest thing that we can do is to leave them here to express the beauty that Mother Earth gives us all the time.
Most Vietnam people live and work in the often beautiful countryside. We stayed in a rural northwestern village to get a closer look at their everyday lives. Rustic and unspoiled, Mai Chau is a patchwork of rice fields and vegetable farms. A peaceful place, a perfect setting for veterans to learn more about a culture so misunderstood over the years.
We're going to do what the villagers do. We're going to eat what they eat. We're going to stay in the house that they stay in.
Life in this small village not far from the Laos border is simple, but not necessarily easier. Families here grow their own produce and raise their own livestock for food. Walking along tranquil dirt roads, we see a woman cutting up fresh green vegetables, a man watering his garden, and a father and son gathering rocks. It's the way things have been done here for generations, perhaps centuries.
The people here, we call the white Thai people. And the house we stay, like this is the white Thai people living on the house on the stilt. And the house mostly made by wood and by bamboo. The roof of the house always by thatch. Yeah. And this house, when they build a house like this here for, usually for 2 or 3 generations.
In our host's home, we ate dinner and enjoyed a ceremonial Thai dance. Just another day for the people of Mai Chau, but a short stay we won't soon forget.
Well, the beauty is hard to describe in truth because it takes part in these people's hearts. I mean, it comes from their hearts, radiates out into their beautiful community.
Battleground visits and country retreats are only one aspect of Tours of Peace. The program's healing process also emphasizes humanitarian goals. An estimated 800,000 Vietnamese men, women, and children still live with the crippling effects of Agent Orange, a chemical the United States used to clear jungle. We met inheritors of this toxic legacy in orphanages and schools and brought them what help we could. Dr. John Fisher from Golden, Colorado, and Daniel Martin from Sierra Vista make up the Mobile MASH unit, an idea John came up with on his first Tours of Peace visit a couple of years ago.
We came to this disabled orphanage and I looked at these children and I said to our organizer, Jess, I said, you know, I can help these people. There's some things that I can do for these kids, you know, and to get them more mobile, moving around.
That's the first time I've seen you do it all day, buddy.
For Daniel, massaging the muscles of these disabled children helps him deal with the guilt he still harbors in his heart.
I was so afraid. I was full of shame and guilt. I had a difficult time looking into the Vietnamese people's eyes because I knew what we had done 35 years ago when I was here. And it was difficult to face the fact that I'm partly responsible for all that stuff. And I don't know if I can ever give back all that we've done here, but I know that I'm willing to try and keep trying. That's what
Daniel uses a technique called rolfing. It promotes well-being by balancing the body's bones and muscles.
Instead of being soft and pliable, it feels like there's big bands of steel inside their backs. So what I'm trying to do is just, John's already adjusted them, so what I'm trying to do is get the muscle tissue just to release a little bit so it'll hold the adjustment.
Few words exchanged, no small talk. Smiles say it all.
It was really a very healing experience. I mean, well, I'm supposed to be the healer, right? But it was a very healing experience for me also to work on these disabled children.
Kind of tells me this is what I should be doing. I wish I could do it more often. I wish I could actually be here to do it more often. But it's great satisfaction, personal satisfaction, and I think the other vets realize how even if we can just a little bit, we're doing a lot. Of all the paychecks I've ever had in my whole life, this is the biggest one I've ever had.
They're sometimes referred to as the forgotten generation, the older men and women of Vietnam who don't have family members to take care of them. They end up here at elderly homes, and while we've brought much needed supplies like shampoo, combs, and even milk, we bring much more than that. We bring love with a human touch. Life can get pretty lonely for the men and women living in this elderly care center in Hoi An, Vietnam, a familiar stop for Tours of Peace.
Well, this is the second time I've been here at the Hoi An nursing home, and the incredible receptivity of the people. They just soak up not only our attention, but the touching, the being with them.
This is also Katie Samara's second visit. The daughter of a Vietnam veteran, she's here to see a special friend.
I met her last year when I was here, and she lost all 8 of her kids during the war, and we just had a connection. She was grabbing onto me and didn't want to let me go, and I'd never make promises, but I promised her I would come back, so here I am.
Most of the residents are elderly, but others are severely mentally and physically handicapped, like this man, wheelchair bound. A salute to Lance is his way of saying thanks. Such friendly gestures have a profound effect on the visiting veterans.
We just feel like we're giving a little bit of ourselves back to here, and it just helps me personally, spiritually, through giving back to these people. We came over here earlier and harmed.
What it really is doing is that it is helping us in the never-ending process of forgiving ourselves and forgiving what happened in our other time when we were here during the war. And it validates that even though we were here as soldiers, now we can come here and offer healing not only for the Vietnamese people, but that healing gets reflected back to us. And that's what the real essence of the top mission has been. That's not just coming back to Vietnam, but that's coming back to Vietnam and doing humanitarian service, giving love.
We also find friends in the street, the way street children do whatever they can to make a little money, shining shoes, selling lottery tickets, or just plain begging. They know us. For the past few years, Tours of Peace has provided a warm meal to these hungry children.
We started this on my first trip back, and it was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. We decided to not eat our lunch and feed the street children, and since then it's turned into an annual event. And it is hectic and wild and hot and crazy, but when it's all done, you can't explain the feeling.
Word of a free meal spreads fast. It's near chaos as the children wait for their food. But despite their hunger, some of them saved part of their meal, putting fried rice in a plastic sack to take home to the rest of their family. Giving and sharing, that's what these visits to Vietnam are all about.
You get more from giving than you give, and it's really true.
And this gift is very special for the disabled children here. And that will be a very meaning gift for them that will stay with them for all of their life.
For these disabled students in Hue, receiving brand new wheelchairs from Tours of Peace is almost like getting a new car. Some travel up to 5 miles one way just to get to class. These specially designed wheelchairs will now make that trip a little easier.
And so it is our pleasure as representatives of top Vietnam veterans that we offer these wheelchairs to your school and hope that they last and work for a very long time for you.
They were young, naive, and fresh out of high school. They were America's youth, but within a matter of weeks, they went from teenagers to gun-toting soldiers. It was a time of war and an age of lost innocence.
And I never really told too many people I was a Vietnam veteran after the early days when I got home.
And why is that?
It's just because it was not very popular, and you know, it's still not that popular to be a Vietnam veteran in our country.
The waves of war came crashing down on John Fisher in 1967. That's when he was drafted and sent to Vietnam. His days of surfing in San Diego were all washed up. He was in the Army now.
My job was to call in the artillery.
It was dangerous work, creeping through the jungle, every step moving closer to an enemy who left him no choice.
And being a forward person, you know, I was involved with a lot of killing.
A moral dilemma he continues to struggle with today.
And I always thought that killing was not an appropriate thing to do. And so now I'm being trained to kill and then sent over to the land of death. And it was tremendously hard for me, and you know, I cried a lot. My first trip in Vietnam, I'll never forget the first time I saw the first person that I was involved in his death, and it was, it's the hardest thing in the world when, I mean, I didn't want to do that. And this guy was here protecting his interests, and I didn't understand what the interest of was in Vietnam was. You know?
Like so many who fought in Vietnam, John was drafted shortly after graduating high school. The average age of a foot soldier or Marine was just 19 years old.
They were children at the time. The thing that struck me when I was over here was that we seemed to be all kids. And at some point, those children went away and they never came back.
A complete tour of duty earned troops a flight home to a nation so divided that the angriest of war protesters called returning soldiers criminals.
And I walked down the gangplank, and the wind was blowing, and I looked around. I felt so great to be home in San Diego, my hometown. I was ready to go surfing and get back on with life, and the first thing I saw was a protester holding up a sign. It was 4th of July, a big deal going on out there. Vietnam veterans are murderers. And it was like somebody reached inside of my heart and just ripped it.
Other vets brought home their own questions. Men like Daniel Martin. He's not proud of the destruction caused by countless bombs he dropped while serving in a Marine Corps air squadron.
We dropped a lot of bombs in a lot of places. We killed innocent people, women and children. And I don't think a lot of people in the United States realize that we killed approximately 3 to 5 million Vietnamese people in that war.
In a way, the war robbed a generation of its youth.
And when family members say that we were never the same after we came back, and that's one of the reasons, because we left that child behind. And hopefully on 202, this trip, we bring it back. And that's one of my goals.
And vets are reaching that goal in part from the people they used to call their enemy, the Vietnamese.
These people, you know, have welcomed us into their community more so than our homeland people welcomed us home after the war.
I get a sense of forgiveness that I have never received in the United States. For most Vietnamese people, the American War, which we called the Vietnam War, is in the past. And there's only the present and the future for these people. And I just feel forgiven here.
As you've seen, delivering humanitarian supplies is a big part of TOP's mission. We're in Anon at a center for orphans and also disabled people. But for one of the vets on our trip, this stop has extra special meaning.
And on this veranda, the French nuns had given us a banquet to thank us for the Christmas giving that we had done that year.
Thomas Brinson shares old photographs and memories with the staff of an orphanage he visited several times during the war. In 1967, Thomas, as an officer in the U.S. Army, brought presents to the children to brighten up their Christmas that year. Weeks later, the 68 Tet Offensive shattered that happiness.
And a number of the children that I had known and played with had been killed, as well as some of the staff that I had known. And it was the most traumatic thing that I experienced during my year in Vietnam.
On Thomas's first trip back to Vietnam, painful memories kept him from visiting the area where all those children were killed.
And when I was here 2 years ago, I couldn't even go back there and look at it. I was able to do that today, and it's very kind of symbolic that what happened then is now completely full circle, because they're building a new building where those buildings were.
This time around, Thomas finds peace and closure.
It deepens the sense of self-forgiveness. It deepens the sense of healing. It deepens the sense of hope that despite all of the horror of the war that was then, that there is always the opportunity for healing and for the extension and the expansion of love and from giving from the heart. It represents out of the worst of what we were in our youth comes the best.
After so much humanitarian work and the long hours of traveling the entire length of Vietnam, there were a couple of days of much-deserved R&R for our group, and what better place to do so than in Ha Long Bay.
Ha Long Bay, I mean, I've read about it as being a self-proclaimed 8th wonder of the world for several years now.
With limestone formations soaring to the sky and birds gliding on the ocean breeze, Ha Long Bay is one of the most beautiful areas in Southeast Asia. We've taken about a 2-hour boat ride from Ha Long Bay to a cove. Veterans are getting a chance to find some peace and quiet while doing some kayaking.
Fantastic, Dan. I still can't believe I'm in North Vietnam. This just doesn't make sense because it's so beautiful. The people are so nice, you know, and this is so much fun. This water is just perfect.
Whether it was kayaking the calm waters of Ha Long Bay, playing in the mud baths in Nha Trang, or offering a helping hand to a total stranger, Vietnam veterans are finally finding peace by going back behind the bamboo curtain.
It has provided me with an enormous release of anger, anxiety, hostility, and all of those attitudes and behaviors associated with my past. And it's just given me a new freedom to look to the future.
Thank you for joining us on our journey back behind the bamboo curtain. You can learn more about Tours of Peace online at topvietnamveterans.org. We've also posted a link at KOLD.com. I'm Dan Maries. Good night.